This episode of The Edge is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the nonprofit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
You're listening to Trek FM.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Welcome, everyone, to Notes from the Edge, a subshow of our Star Trek Discovery podcast, The Edge. I'm C Bryan Jones, or Chris, and I'll be your host as we flip through the pages of our notebook. In Notes from the Edge, we'll explore connections between Discovery and the greater Star Trek universe, which includes the prior 6 TV series and 13 films, as well as the massive literary universe, because there are elements from there that are being worked into the series. And we'll also delve deeper into some of the ideas unique to Discovery. I kick off each episode of Notes with my thoughts on the latest episode of Discovery, which this time means Choose Your Pain. I'll try to keep these short because I have a lot to get to in Notes, but I might go a little long today because I have a few points I want to make. Altogether in this episode, I'll touch on 5 main points: the tardigrade, the Stamets-Culber relationship, Saru's time in the captain's chair, some connections to past Trek, and Lieutenant Ash Tyler, who is the focus of the Notes section. Before I really get started, though, there's something that I loved that I keep forgetting to mention: the past 2 shows, and that comes from Context is for Kings. When they did a breath scan to enter the restricted area of engineering, I did a double take. And the reason is that just 2 weeks before, I was joking at the office about the iPhone X's facial ID, and I said that the next version of the iPhone will probably have Breath ID, and Apple will have to invent a new screen that won't fog up when you breathe on it. And then, there it was on Discovery. It was a lot of fun when I saw that. Okay, on to the real points about Choose Your Pain. Well, the first is actually similar to what I just talked about. It's something that I anticipated that turned up on the show. If you listened to last week's Notes, then you know that I talked about how real-life tardigrades shed their water as a survival mechanism when in extreme environments. It's called desiccation. I published that episode the day before Choose Your Pain aired, and then there it was on the screen. The tardigrade shed its water. As Tilly would say, that was... No, I'm just kidding. But it was pretty cool, and it shows how much the writers have researched the science behind this seemingly fantastical propulsion system. As for the characters, I keep talking about Tilly each week and how I'm not liking her that much. She took another step forward for me this week, though, and not because of her F-bomb. I can see how she and Burnham play off one another and are helping each other grow. And I do think Mary Wiseman is doing an excellent job portraying the character. Still not my favorite, but I'm coming around. As for the F-bomb, well, I've commented on it several times in the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. After watching the episode once, my feeling was that it was forced and poorly handled, that it was put into the script simply because it could be, as if to say, look, we don't have to worry about network censors or syndication anymore. Now that I've watched the episode 4 times, I don't feel that it was forced in terms of delivery. It does seem natural for Tilly to say it. It's fine. I did read one comment in which someone said that she said it and they moved right along, like it's no big deal. They just dropped it in and went on their way. Well, that's not true. She said it. They stopped everything. Stamets repeated it, emphasizing it, in fact. And then they continued. So the use of this word literally stopped the story. And that's fine, but don't tell me that they dropped it in and they moved right along, because that's not what happened. Although I now feel that it worked fine, I still believe it was written into the script just for the sake of doing it. I'm not offended by it, but it wasn't necessary. I am surprised that it continues to be such a hot topic. The things that society is offended by these days is puzzling, to say the least. It's not a big deal. She said it. Speaking of which, things that society is offended by, I want to talk about Stamets and Culber. Many people lost their minds when it was revealed that Discovery would feature the first openly gay character in Star Trek. And finding out that 2 senior officers would be a homosexual couple was really too much for some, who continue to kick and scream about it even now. But the way this has been handled by the writers has been beyond superb. It feels absolutely natural. And the actors, Anthony Rapp as Stamets and Wilson Cruz as Dr. Culber, have played it beautifully. And what I mean by that is that their relationship seems real. I read an article on a major website in which the author speculated, after the sickbay scene in The Butcher's Knife, on whether there was already a relationship between them or if it was to come. Wow. Anyone who has been in a long-term relationship or has been married for a long time could tell immediately, just by the looks Stamets and Culber gave each other, that they were a couple and that their relationship is in a mature stage. It's very obvious every time they've appeared on screen together. What's more, just as with Sulu's reunion with his partner in Star Trek Beyond, there is nothing blatant here. There is no in-your-face message that the writers are trying to send, despite what many in social media would have you believe. It's just 2 people who care about each other who happen to be the same gender. It's very well written and very well acted. The last character I'd like to talk about is Saru. As you know, if you listen to this show, I really like Saru, and I think Doug Jones is doing a phenomenal job. In Choose Your Pain, we see him thrust into the captain's chair. And throughout the week, I've seen people saying how their opinion of him has dropped. One person in the Babel conference even said that Saru is a fool who is unfit for command. Wow, I beg to differ. I think there are a few things going on. One is that some of those who are making these comments aren't really thinking about the big picture. They're just seeing him be abrasive to certain crew members, maybe even appearing to be a bit dictatorial at times. Another is that because it hasn't really been shown on the screen, there hasn't been time for it, the fact that Saru and Burnham have a long and complex relationship spanning nearly 8 years, one filled with animosity, isn't being taken into account. When we watch the interactions between Saru and Burnham, we need to keep in mind that there is a long history between them, and that Saru, as he explains at the end of this episode, feels inferior to and robbed by Burnham. He not only blames her for blocking his career path and for preventing him from being mentored by Georgiou, he also blames her for Georgiou's death, and he blames himself for being unable to prevent that death. In Choose Your Pain, Saru is faced with the possibility that Lorca could die, and this time it is he himself who is the first officer. That's a lot of weight on his shoulders. If you actually watch the decisions that Saru makes, he does the same things that we would praise Kirk, Picard, or Janeway for, and he uses his unique instincts as a species who was hunted to resolve the situation in a critical moment by recognizing the flight pattern of the lead raider and realizing that Lorca was aboard, trying to escape. That was critical to the success of the mission. Yes, Saru's tone was harsh with his crew. This could in part be due to the influence of Lorca, sure. I think it is more due to his fear of losing his captain and failing the orders given to him by Admiral Cornwell. And certainly Burnham and their long history is a factor that raises tension in him. Lorca was rescued because of Saru. Yes, it was Stamets who risked his life and made the final jump possible, but if Saru had not intervened earlier, the mission would have failed. Stamets had the engines offline and would not have had Discovery ready to jump in time if not ordered to do so. That is the job of the captain. Saru did what he was supposed to do. To say he is unfit for command, it really makes no sense to me. And speaking of Saru's decision, I'll move to my final point for thoughts, freeing the tardigrade. I have no doubt that it pained Saru greatly to think that the tardigrade, as a potentially sentient species, would suffer or even die if forced to navigate the ship out of Klingon space. After all, Saru comes from a race of hunted, sentient beings. But, as he told Dr. Culber, if that ends up being true, I will face the consequences of my actions. So, when Lorca was safely returned to the ship, Saru told Burnham to help the tardigrade, and she set it free. That action, on both their parts, was so completely Star Trek. The Devil in the Dark and Encounter at Farpoint both immediately come to mind. So, enough with the Discovery isn't Star Trek bit. It's getting tired. And you can tell that those saying it aren't actually watching the show. They're too busy tweeting and posting about how bad Discovery is. Yes, Discovery is different from the Star Trek that has come before, but it is still very much Star Trek. And what happened with the tardigrade, in the end, shows that that is true. Okay, those are my thoughts. Sorry they were a bit long. Let's move on to notes. When it comes to connections, there were so many small references in this episode that I can't possibly cover them all here, so I'm going with a theme: places. Our first stop is in Klingon space, the Mempa system. This is where they find the Klingon battlecruiser on which Lorca is being held. And this appears to be a connection to the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. On TNG in Redemption, the Mempa system is the site of battles during the Klingon Civil War. In Part 1, Worf and Kurn discuss it.
I am the older brother, Kurn. I speak for our family. We will back Gowron.
It will be difficult to convince my allies to back Gowron. But I will try. I must go to the Mempa sector to meet with the other squadron commanders.
Contact me when you have gained their support. Then I will be ready for Gowron.
And in Part 2, Sela mentions it.
The Romulan convoy is late. We need those supplies.
Gowron has suffered another loss near the Memphis system. His forces will not threaten you in that region for some time.
But if
The
Gowron...
convoy will arrive in due course.
The Federation fleet has left Starbase 234.
As does Kurn.
Our forces in the Memphis sector are now in full retreat. They will need to regroup near Beta Lanko.
We destroyed their supply bases in that sector 3 weeks ago. How can they continue to fight?
They must be getting help.
On DS9, in Apocalypse Rising, the episode in which Sisko, Odo, and O'Brien go on a mission with Worf to Tygo Core to expose Gowron as a changeling, there is an exchange between O'Brien, posing as a Klingon named Pahash, and Martok.
Hold on there. Don't I know you?
I would be honored to think so.
I know we have met.
I am Pahash,
of the House of Conja. The name is not familiar to me, but there is something about you. Perhaps we met on the battlefield. My regiment fought at Mempa. Mempa? Many noble deeds were done on that dark day. And yours have become legend. Mempa? Yes, that must be it. After the ceremony, would you honor me with a drink? We will salute the fallen. There is something very familiar about this face.
Our next stop is here on Earth, Iowa. There's something about Star Trek in Iowa. Captain Kirk is famously from there. He just works in outer space. A connection that first appeared in Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, over pizza with Dr. Jillian Taylor, and again in the 2009 film. It's also mentioned in the TOS comic The Ashes of Eden, published by DC, which is a version of Shatner's famous novel written with Judith and Garfield Reeves-Stevens. If you watch closely, you'll catch sneaky references to Iowa on displays in the Neutral Zone, the Royale, Little Green Men, and Stormfront. In the 2009 film, we see the Enterprise being built in Riverside, Iowa, Kirk's hometown. I feel that this is the likely inspiration for the connection in Choose Your Pain, when Admiral Cornwell mentions Starfleet's classified facility in Jefferson, Iowa. The state just seems to be very attractive to Starfleet. Maybe Iowa offers a lot of tax incentives. There are even Iowa-class starships used by Starfleet in the 24th century, according to the RPG module The Price of Freedom, part of the series published in 1999 and 2000 by Last Unicorn Games. In the Myriad Universes novel A Less Perfect Union by William Leisner, we learn that, in that timeline, George Kirk's family stayed in Iowa and never moved to Deneva, and thus didn't die in the events portrayed in Operation Annihilate. Lastly, for a deep cut, in 2240, 12 years before he entered Starfleet Academy, James T. Kirk competed in a racquetball tournament in Sioux Falls. That's from the novel Republic by Michael Jan Friedman, the first book in the My Brother's Keeper trilogy. Our last stop is in the Beta Quadrant, Benzar. This is the site of one of the three major contributions that Discovery made during the 3 weeks leading up to Choose Your Pain. The Benzites are, of course, the blue-skinned and rather arrogant species first seen in TNG's Coming of Age. We also see them in A Matter of Honor and DS9's The Ship. And civilian Benzites appear in Blaze of Glory, You Are Cordially Invited, One Little Ship, Prodigal Daughter, and Penumbra. We've also seen some Benzite-looking aliens in episodes of Enterprise, the Xindi and Raijin, although it isn't clear if these are actual Benzites or just a reuse of the makeup. The planet itself is mentioned in DS9's The Reckoning, and it is another war connection. During the Dominion War, Benzar fell to Dominion forces and had to be liberated by the Romulans once they joined the Federation Alliance, of course. And that liberation is part of Una McCormick's novel Hollow Men. It raises an interesting question about the strategic value of Benzar. During the 24th century, it is a Federation world, and we don't know when Benzar gained this status, though in Coming of Age, which takes place in 2364, it is implied that Federation membership was recent. Chang points out in the dialogue to Murdoch that the cadet is the first Benzite in Starfleet. In the reference book The Worlds of the Federation, first published in 1989, it is mentioned that the spaceborne city Maria is a major Federation port and repair center that might soon be given starbase status. An implication of Lorca's statements at the strategy briefing at the start of Choose Your Pain is that Benzar is under Klingon control in 2256, 108 years before the TNG reference. So, is it the geographic position that makes it valuable? Is it the rare gases in the atmosphere, which the natives require for respiration, that are of value for obviously some other use than breathing for the Klingons or humans? It hasn't been explained even in the literature to my knowledge, but perhaps it will be in one of the future Discovery novels, if that blockade turns out to be significant, or maybe even in an episode. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is a theory that has been going around all week.
I didn't realize there were more of us in here.
We pulled out of rotation. Sometimes they let us heal up, so we last longer.
What's your name, soldier?
Lieutenant Ash Tyler.
And the captain you lost?
Stephen Marinville, the USS Jaeger. The finest, sir.
You were at the Battle of the Binaries?
They gave it a name. That's where I was captured.
So you've been here 7 months. That's funny to you?
Sorry, sir. It's just, if that's true, I'm tougher than I thought.
Or a liar. Nobody survives Klingon torture for 7 months. What are you doing here? They got a reason to keep you alive.
Captain of this ship. She's taken a liking to me.
If you're invested enough in Discovery to be listening to this podcast, you probably already know about it. It involves Ash Tyler, the Starfleet officer Lorca rescues from the Klingon prison ship. Or maybe Tyler rescues Lorca. They did it together. But I'll give you a spoiler warning nevertheless. It's not really a spoiler, since it's just speculation, but it could be where the plot is headed. So, if you don't want to think about it at all, this is your spoiler warning. Okay. That said, I'm talking about the theory that Lieutenant Ash Tyler is actually Voq. I've been mulling this over in my head all week, and although initially I had reservations, I'm now convinced that he is. I'll explain why, and I'll also explain why I initially had doubts. Those reasons are still with me, but they've been overpowered by all the evidence that suggests we now have a Klingon on board Discovery. It's all very convenient, right? Lorca is abducted by Klingons while traveling back to Discovery aboard a shuttle. The ship is captained by L'Rell. There is a mysterious Starfleet officer in the cell who is about the same build as Voq. We know that Voq must redeem himself in the eyes of the Klingons, and at the end of the Butcher's Knife, L'Rell tells Voq that to do so he must win the war, and she has a way. Then, two humans, Lorca and Tyler, escape from a Klingon battlecruiser and survive a chase by 5 raiders. Seems a bit convenient, right? The conversation between L'Rell and Voq at the end of episode 4 pretty much gives it away in my opinion. But before we get to that, I'd like to explain why I initially doubted it. It comes down to language. They've gone to such great lengths to make language realistic on this show. The Klingons speak to one another only in Klingon, and when we do hear them speak English, it is heavily accented. Even in this episode, when Lorca compliments L'Rell on her English, her speech is still heavily accented. She could never pass as a native speaker. Tyler, on the other hand, not only speaks without a foreign accent, but uses the language in a casual, colloquial way that is very difficult for even the most accomplished language learners to do in a language other than their mother tongue. The idea that Voq would be able to speak English in this way 7 months after the Battle of the Binaries is very hard to swallow. In any past Star Trek series, it wouldn't be an issue, because everyone is speaking English all the time. The concept of language skill and accents doesn't come into play. But here, because so much emphasis has been placed on language realism, for me, this is a major disregard for reality on the part of the writers, if Ash Tyler is in fact Voq. The problem is, this is the only reason I could come up with to doubt the theory. So, let's look at why I'm almost certain they've pulled the old switcheroo. Near the end of the butcher's knife, when Voq has been left to die on the corpse of the Shinjo, L'Rell beams aboard to save him. She tells Voq, "We must strategize on a grander scale. In order to convince the 24 houses to follow T'Kuvma's teachings, you must win this war." To this, Voq replies, "You speak as if you have a way." "I do," she says. "I've stolen a raider and will take you to the home of the Mokai. I will leave you with the matriarchs, who will expose you to things you never knew possible. But it comes at a cost." "What must I sacrifice?" Voq asks. "Everything," says L'Rell. I'd say that having to walk around in the skin of your enemy, speaking their language, living among them, is sacrificing everything. You've shed your entire identity. There are also hints throughout this episode itself. Tyler tells Lorca that he has survived because the captain of the ship has taken a liking to him. When they are escaping and L'Rell confronts Tyler in the corridor, she says, "Did you really think you could leave me after all we've been through?" It also seems that the writers anticipated my questions about language and attempted to address them in dialogue. Insufficiently, but at least there is an attempt. When Lorca compliments L'Rell on her English, she explains, "I'm descended from spies. Languages are useful, particularly when it comes to understanding those who seek to destroy the Klingon Empire." And she explained in an earlier episode that she is from the house of Mokai, where she took Voq. The implication being that they are experts in language, and therefore, perhaps as a justification from the writers as to why Voq as Tyler would be able to speak English so well, he's going to be trained there. So, I'm imagining Voq with the Mokai undergoing alteration to look human, either through surgery, a la Arn Darvin, or exposure to the augment virus. I think the former is more likely. And sitting through 7 months of intense language training at Space Berlitz. It's completely unrealistic for Voq to speak English like Tyler after 7 months, or even 7 years. But I do think we're supposed to just ignore this. Because Ash Voqler lives. And one more thing that makes me feel certain. A tweet from Nick Meyer. It came through his Stella Star Trek Dog account at Star Trek Dog. These are allegedly tweets from Nick's dog, as he overhears things or sees things in the writer's room. In response to the question, why don't we hear more about Javid Iqbal, the mysterious actor playing Voq, Meyer replied, "I'm an expert on Sherlock Holmes, not Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde." And as Mike Schindler told me, someone, we think our own Bruce Gibson from Literary Treks and Live from the Edge was the first, discovered that Shahzad Latif is a stage name, and the actor's real last name is Iqbal. As a meme I saw this week said, in true Tilly fashion, that's Voq and Cole. A few questions do remain, but I've come to satisfactory answers. One is, if Tyler is Voq, and this whole abduction and escape is just a scheme to get him aboard Discovery, why does he fight L'Rell in the corridor when Lorca is not around? That seems a little bit strange, but I think one reason could be that he is angry at L'Rell for making him do this, making him give up his identity as a Klingon and take the form of a human and go live with them. There's no doubt that he already harbors anger towards her for betraying him to Cole. We see that at the end of The Butcher's Knife when she beams aboard the Shenzhou. And it's also possible that she has been mistreating him. We don't know. But as the moment came to leave the ship, his anger at what has happened to him may have bubbled over, and he directed it at the person he sees as being responsible. It's just speculation on my part, but it works for me. And there's one more thing going on here. One more element to try and throw us off. Many have asked, why Harry Mudd? Why is he in this episode? My theory? Distraction. There's no reason for Harry Mudd to be in this episode. And his story is so convoluted that no one is buying it, especially not Lorca. But there is one very important thing about Harry Mudd. He's familiar. While the writers slip Voq into human skin and onto Discovery, we're distracted by this familiar character from the original series. I'm sure he'll come back in future episodes, and maybe there will be a better reason for this character being specifically Mudd. But for now, I think he was there to distract, like a magician keeping your eyes off the simplicity of their actual trick. All right, so those are the notes from The Edge for Week 5 of Star Trek Discovery. Be sure to check out all of our Discovery coverage throughout the week. We have stuff going on 5 days a week. On Monday night, this happens live on YouTube. It's Monday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. Bruce and Brandy get together for Live from the Edge. And you can tweet to them, you can chat with them, and they'll talk about the things you say on the show. They'll also share their initial thoughts after having just watched the episode. And if you can't catch it live on YouTube, we also put it out in the podcast feed on Tuesday morning as a regular podcast. Then on Wednesday, we have a commentary track for you on Tracks from the Edge. That's Mike Schindler and a guest. And I'm pretty sure it's the quickest ever that there has been a commentary track for a new episode of a television show. And that's always really interesting because Mike has really fascinating insights into things as he watches. So again, that's on Wednesday. And then on Thursdays, we have Postcards from the Edge with Amy. And you can submit your feedback on the latest episode of Discovery. Twitter's fine. You can also do it in the Babel Conference on Facebook, or you can email us, trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and choose The Edge. And Amy will get the message there. But she compiles all this stuff. She brings on a guest and actually talks about your feedback from the latest episode. Again, that's on Thursday. And then on Friday, we have the Edge main show, which has our usual full analysis after we've had time to think about it for a week. And then at the end of the week, on the weekend, usually Saturday, maybe Sunday, I'll be wrapping things up, as I've done today, on Notes from the Edge with this kind of deep dive into links between Discovery and the broader franchise, also my thoughts on the episode, and some more in-depth analysis of some of the plot points. You'll find all of these various sub-shows of The Edge in the main feed for The Edge and in the Trek FM master feed. Now, we'd love to hear your thoughts on Discovery, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the things I talked about today. The best place to share your general thoughts is in the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook, where Amy Nelson, as I mentioned, will collect your feedback for Postcards from the Edge. We always put a post for every episode of all of our podcasts in the Babel Conference so that there can be a discussion thread attached, extending that discussion from what you hear here on our shows to the broader audience there on Facebook. So that's probably the best place, but you can also tweet at us. Our username on Twitter is TrekFM, or send us an email using the contact form on our website, as I mentioned a moment ago, trek.fm/contact, and choose to send to a show and choose The Edge. If you'd like to find me personally, I'm there in the Babel Conference, so I'll see your posts if you post there, but Twitter is perhaps the best place to reach me. My username is C Bryan Jones, letter C, and Bryan with a Y. That's also my username on Facebook and pretty much everywhere in social media. And if you'd like to hear more of my thoughts on Discovery and Star Trek in general here on the network, my main show is The Ready Room. I just dropped a new episode earlier this week where Larry Nemechek and I revisit some of the discussion that we had a bit before the premiere of Discovery, and we revisit those topics in light of what we've seen on the screen. We also talk about the business side of Star Trek and Discovery, and we talk about some new topics such as Section 31, Spore Drive, and things like that. That's The Ready Room episode 216, so catch that if you haven't heard it yet, and go backwards as well. There are quite a few episodes about Discovery there between 210 and 216, and of course, discussion of broad Star Trek all the way through. I also do The Orb, which is our dedicated Deep Space Nine show. I co-host that with Matthew Rushing, and you can hear me on lots of episodes of various shows if you go way deep back into the catalog. Plus, you can find my writing about Star Trek over on the official website at startrek.com. I'd like to take a moment before I go to thank our associate producers here on The Edge, Norman C. Lau, Tony Robinson, Lisa Slack, Tom Puleo, Shoaib Mirza, and Richard Rutledge. Thank you so much, all of you guys, for your support of the show. I really appreciate it, and that makes it possible for us to bring not just this show, but everything on the network to everyone each day of the week. So thank you so much for your support, and also thank you to everyone else who is supporting us through Patreon at any level. It means a great deal to us, and if you'd like to help us keep all of our shows going and even become an associate producer yourself, just visit patreon.com/trekfm for all the details. That's patreon.com/trekfm. You can find out about Patron Zone, our special website for patrons. You can find out about the Patrons Roundtable, where you can get on mic, just like I'm doing right now, and talk with some of our hosts and other listeners about Star Trek. We have all kinds of things going on all the time, so please check it out, patreon.com/trekfm. Well, that's all I have for you this time. I know the show was a little bit longer than last week, I think, so thank you for hanging in there with me. I hope you enjoyed it. I really appreciate you listening, and I hope you'll join me again next time as we jot down more notes right on the paper's edge.